Good evening, everyone. My name is Donatella Della Ratta. I'm Associate Professor of Communications and Media Studies at the Com Department at John Cabot University. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the second lecture within our lecture series, Digital Delights and Disturbances. The topic, as you can see it from the screen, can AI actually be decolonized, a Global South perspective? We thought, these days there is a lot of chit-chat about AI and also issues that are connected to AI, such as privacy, ethics, labor underneath AI. We thought, though, that it would be good to actually look at this issue from a decolonial perspective. And have also these issues tackled by someone who looks at generative AI also in the context of war and violence. Ameera Kawash is a Palestinian-Iraqi American artist. She's based in London. She has a PhD from the Royal College of Art, obtained in 2022. Her thesis actually focused on how artists can radically retool existing technologies as an artistic and social practice. She's not only an artist who works a lot with generative AI, but she's also a consultancy. She has a consultancy agency called Orbital Bloom, which is actually an award-winning startup at the intersection of art and sustainability. Orbital Bloom was a recipient of an innovative UK grant and got a lot of awards for the pioneering work that they are doing on generative AI. So tonight we're going to hear from Ameera about generative AI in the context of the ongoing violence in the Middle East. Because of the topic, we felt compelled to say something. The Communication and Media Studies Department stands in solidarity with the people of Palestine and Lebanon and firmly against the indiscriminate killing of all and any civilians, particularly the ongoing genocide in Gaza. We denounce the reckless use of force that kills, injures, maims, forcibly deports, and denies humanitarian aid to those in need, in blatant violation of international law and basic human dignity. So I leave the floor to Ameera Kawash. She's going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we will have our Q&A. Thank you, and enjoy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening, and thank you to Donatella for that introduction. Let me just kind of get my microphone ready. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about decolonial AI. This is a term that has been overused. It's on trend, and it's also considered. It's also being co-opted by the far right as well so it's a difficult and problematic term, but we hope to kind of get something really useful out of it more than just value signaling, etc. So I'm going to begin the talk. So we're going to explore what AI means at this critical and dangerous moment, when, in the words of Francesca Albanese, in Gaza, the collective shame of the century continues unabated. In defiance of every norm of international law, AI is implicated in crimes against humanity, especially in the mass targeting of civilians in Gaza, but also as part of authoritarian and repressive technologies that are being unfolded worldwide, including in surveillance and military systems. So how can we understand the role of AI at this dangerous juncture, one that is defined by the erosion of human rights, the polycrisis of the climate emergency, and the ongoing power imbalances between the global north and south, as well as the normalization of mass violence. So all of which AI systems are contributing to and accelerating. So central to this question about is decolonial AI actually possible, or is it too deeply entangled with technologies that perpetuate inequality, dehumanization, militarization, and north to south knowledge exchanges? Is there actually a role for AI and other high-tech computation-heavy technologies in building greater resilience for at-risk and oppressed communities. So the presentation will focus on the relationship between civilian as well as military technologies, and ask whether, can AI contribute to our global survival as a species, or is it in some sense accelerating our collective future side, and should more or less be abolished? This is a question that is complex, and it requires really evaluating the costs and the benefits of engaging with the technologies, as well as the consequences of being excluded from them. So in particularly in the context of the weaponization of the digital divide, which we'll discuss in more depth. So for the most part, I explore a participatory paradigm to reimagining and decolonizing AI. This, to me, means that we need to substantially increase access. We need to promote the democratization of high-tech technologies. We need to combat the digital divide, and we need to create south to north knowledge flows and innovation. So in order to build up civic power, our civic power in these systems, I believe we are better equipped to resist, to reimagine, and to transform them. And I recognize this necessitates a kind of ethical duplicity with AI technologies, and I'm willing to be challenged on this or have this really put to the test, but this is currently what I am working with in terms of my artistic practice as well as my methodologies. So, okay, so on that note, the first part of this presentation is going to be a critical overview of some of the most egregious dangers of artificial intelligence, not as some abstract horizon or singularity type fear-mongering hypothesis, but it's really about how AI technologies are being currently deployed in authoritarian and oppressive and indeed genocidal contexts. So as a media scholar, this presentation will provide some context to the militaristic uses of AI, but I will focus more on the consumer and popular applications of AI, particularly in relationship to synthetic media and its relationship with political violence. And in particular, I focus on how generative AI is extending and participating in the dehumanization of Palestinian lives and narratives, as well as other forms of harms, including anti-immigrant and anti-Islamic biases. And then the second part of the presentation will shift to focus more on artist-led innovation from the Global South and its diasporas. And I will look at some artists who are engaging with generative AI, using it as a critical archival practice or within critical archival practices, and laying the groundwork for decolonizing AI in its relationship to colonial archives, past, present, and future. And I'll also discuss a little bit about my own work as an artist, as a Palestinian-Iraqi American artist. These may seem like small interventions when you look at the colossal scale that AI technologies are being unfolded in, but I think that they are important, and I think when you're caught up in a storm as big as the one that we're caught up in, you have to just throw seeds into the wind and hope that some of them will be productive and take root. So we'll be looking at some artistic interventions in this space. So we'll start with an archival project that I'm working on called the Synthetic Violence Project, and then we will move to looking at a general overview of militarization of AI and its relationship with consumer applications. And then the artist working with critical archival practice, and then ending with a discussion in relation to futuriside, particularly for Palestinian communities, individuals, and people, which is not an abstract concept. It relates to genocide and Israel's genocidal campaign, which goes beyond the targeting and killing of bodies and includes scholasticide, it includes ecocide, it includes culturecide, and it includes futurecide as well. So futurecide for Palestinian people involves both depriving them of access to technological systems, but also restricting their participation and self-determination in their futures. So, and we are seeing these futurecides play out today with these so-called reconstruction projects for the future of Gaza that the US and Israel are pandering today. So beyond that as well, futurecide is also about the destruction of our common humanitarian future. And Palestine is part of our common humanity, our history and future. So the question, I will end with, discussing futurecide, and the question of decolonizing AI is as much rooted in anti-colonial struggles as it is past and present, but it is also really about the future and decolonizing how we think and imagine and relate to the future. As Walter Benjamin said, there is no document of culture which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. So I am looking at AI as a high-tech document, but reflecting both its cultural and its barbaric dimensions. So let us now switch slides, sort of switch tones a bit. Oops, wrong side. Okay. So I just want to kind of cool down from that for a moment and just look at also what decolonial AI means in terms of critical archival practice. And I want to introduce some ideas about generative AI and how it relates to critical archival practice. So all the artistic projects that I will present in this talk revolve around a common axis, a critical and decolonial engagement with archives. However, these archives are not necessarily limited to the past. AI is structured much like a traditional archive. It has vast data sets that are indexed, categorized, processed, and retrieved. However, unlike a traditional archive, it affects future outcomes by predicting, generating, or even hallucinating outputs. Therefore, the traditional notion of an archive both applies and doesn't apply to generative AI because it's doing more than just preserving and retrieving archival objects. So generative AI is kind of like an archive of potential futures. It iterates digital artifacts, though this is constrained by its machine learning parameters. The problem with this is that these futures are not for everyone. AI is trained on millions of images scraped from the internet. These reflect biases in the data as well as those of the developers and the data scientists. So in AI-generated media, we see a kind of regurgitation of the dominant internet as well as the crystallization of Western-centric forms of knowledge into visual forms. The issues of data bias, representational and epistemological injustices, and unequal access lead to the production of certain futures for some and marginalizing, excluding, or erasing futures for others. So generative AI functions like a massive archiving system whose infrastructure, non-locality, and invisibility make it a kind of hyper-object, to use Timothy Morton's term. Most AI technologies are developed in the global north and generally neglect oppressed and marginalized groups and perspectives. This is what Boaventura de Sousa Santos has called epistemicide, which is the murder of knowledge that occurs when there's unequal exchanges between cultures, between the oppressor and the oppressed, and so on. So we will be looking at dehumanization, discrimination, colonial forms of violence, and how they play into generative AI media today, as well as impacting oppressed, at-risk, and ephemeral other types of knowledges. Yes, so in this project, together with my research partner, who is Sinem Goruju, we have started an archive to document instances of synthetic violence, and that is what the archive is called. And this has to do with documenting and categorizing how AI-generated images are creating new forms of image violence and engaging in digital dehumanization, bias, and shaping how politically oriented violence is consumed and circulated. The goal of the archive is to document and categorize AI forms of harm. And by doing so, we aim to mitigate these harms by providing relevant context, interpretation, documentation, as well as creating possibilities for community and engagement around these harms, and in some sense to dispel them or to disarm them. So the first project, part of the project, was to collect and map forms of anti-Palestinian bias in popular generative AI media that have emerged during this last year of Israel's genocidal war. And the second focuses more on the far right, and particularly anti-Muslim and anti-immigration bias. So the main goal of the archive is to collect harms, to provide a taxonomy, and to make this searchable to users through metadata. Some of the questions we're asking are, what does it mean for synthetic images to trade in depictions of war and human suffering, which are further processed, distanced, generalized, and sanitized from what is happening on the ground? What happens to witnessing, to documentation, and to empathy when synthetic images deepen the divide between image and reality, between content and embodied suffering? So we've been collecting AI images depicting Palestinian life with simple prompts, for example, Palestinian woman, Palestinian child in the city, over the last year. So while a similar prompt might describe a British child in a park or street setting, the Palestinian child appears in a generalized AI-generated wasteland without any context, without any history, without any signs of the perpetrator. It's just a scene of mass destruction, which is embedded in the models, the model's bias. So these images were from generators like Midjourney, Adobe, Shutterstock. So these are commonly available and widely used. For Palestinians, whose participation in global communication system is already marked by unequal access to technology due to Israel's digital occupation and ongoing experiences of digital dehumanization, these synthetic media presents yet another new form of harm in an already very distorted mediascape. By defaulting to AI-generated wastelands, these popular image generators normalize and aestheticize scenes of exceptional violence directed at a specific group of people. They obscure Israel's military presence and violence and occupation, and they fail to hold Israel visually accountable for the destruction of lives, lands, and livelihoods. This builds on what Rana Matar called image normalization, a dominant representational order that silences Palestinian narratives and reinforces the notion that violence inflicted by Israel or others represents contemporary Palestinian life. AI-generated imagery extends this normalization from traditional media into the phantasmagoria of synthetic media. So let me see. These AI-generated depictions exasperate Palestinian fears of national, cultural, and digital erasure. They provide no context, no causality. They portray an occupation without an occupier. And these are basically the more common, in the last year that we have seen, the more common depictions by default of prompts like Palestinian child or Palestinian people. Right, just more examples. These were examples of more like menacing characters and villainization and sort of menacing scenes. And now we're going to look at an example of colonial futurism, which is to say colonial futuriside. And this is a state-sanctioned use of generative AI by the Israeli Prime Minister's office. In May 2023, the Prime Minister's office issued a report entitled Gaza 2035. It outlines a day-after scenario in Gaza, framed through the lens of this violent colonial futurism. What you see is sleek, high-tech cityscapes, silver-domed skyscrapers, solar panels, sustainable green spaces, and Arabs in traditional clothing, which is fairly uncommon in Gaza. So this futuricidal vision is apparently set upon the mass graves and the widespread destruction caused by Israel's genocidal campaign. The report compares itself to the Marshall Plan, suggests that the same forces that have destroyed Gaza will reconstruct this high-tech metropolis. This distorted vision is somehow presented as realism, and despite this obvious propaganda, leading media outlets publish these images without acknowledging their role in perpetrating the incredibly violent dehumanization and genocide denial that is embedded in these images. So in this case, these to me are images that really define futuriside. It's not just generative AI now it's a genocidal AI. It's hallucinating a future that is void of the participation, of the consent of the people whom it supposedly concerns, and perhaps even void of the people themselves. And yet, we are still witnessing these preposterous reconstruction plans being contemplated by the US administration, and most recently there has been talk about creating kind of biometric AI-driven ghettos in Gaza, according to the Middle East Eye. So now we're going to shift, and I will be a little, I think for the time, I might be a little bit briefer on this one, but the use of synthetic media by far-right groups, most of these, well, two of these come from the UK and also from India, we're seeing there have been a lot of reports and et cetera of synthetic media increasingly being deployed to lend credibility to outlandish and hateful political agendas. A notable example is these images of young girls surrounded by threatening Muslim men, which was accompanied by the caption, "Is this the future of the UK?" And this was widely shared during the period of riots in the UK as part of a large-scale disinformation campaign. Similarly, Euronews has reported that far-right parties in Europe are using synthetic media, and The Guardian has reported that Meta approved of AI-manipulated political ads during India's elections, which contained derogatory slurs against Muslims. So synthetic realism is being exploited by members of the far right to lend an air of credibility to hateful and biases and ideas. And of course, this phenomenon occurs across the political spectrum, but the potential for generative AI in inflammatory uses is particularly concerning. The speed of which the media can be produced and its kind of credibility and believability can make it really an accelerant for fear and for hatred and for division. Okay. So what is the relationship between the synthetic media that we have been looking at to military campaigns, and in particular, the genocidal war on Gaza? if we want to examine the relationship between generative AI and militarization, political violence, we can start to also establish some loose connections between consumer technologies and their more dangerous military applications and surveillance uses. As I said, Israel has been using AI in military warfare, in the Lavender system, in Gospel, in the sinisterly named Where's Daddy, to mass target Palestinian individuals and communities. In practice, this was neither sophisticated nor precise, and it just accelerated the proliferation of indiscriminate bombings and the use of so-called dumb bombs. The high-speed computing, machine learning, and automated decision-making is already being embedded within military technologies, and this has profound implications, as digital dehumanization is intimately tied to the process of datafication. The Automated Decision Research Group, an advocacy group tracking autonomous weapon systems, has said, quote, digital dehumanization is the process by which humans are reduced to data, which is then used to make decisions or take actions that negatively impact their lives. Anthony Lowenstein, the author of the Palestine Laboratory, has pointed out that Israel's military industry is booming, with companies like Elbit Systems being featured at arms fairs, while the broader Israeli economy suffers. The defense sector pushes the country more and more towards militarization. So to return to what is the relationship of synthetic media to the genocidal war in Gaza, if we look at the 10 stages of genocide, according to Gregory H. Staunton, I don't need to go through all of them, but there's classification, discrimination, preparation, persecution, extermination, denial. They're not linear, they can overlap. When weaponized, synthetic media can contribute to a couple of these stages, particularly the dehumanization, the symbolization, and denial. By normalizing harmful representations of extreme violence directed at a particular group. In the context of Gaza, synthetic media, as we have seen, depicts Palestinians through the lens of their destruction and their despair, and reducing them to symbols of extreme loss and devastation. By naturalizing this abject condition, these images further contribute to dehumanization. Additionally, they perform image violence by erasing the culpability and visual presence of occupying and military forces and presenting devastation as the default state of Palestinian existence. So, as AI continues to influence global narratives, particularly through the creation of synthetic realism, it has potential to significantly contribute to dehumanization, discrimination, and the denial of atrocities. It can be a tool of active complicity. Let's see now. So I don't want to at all reduce the horrors of what is happening in Gaza to a kind of cautionary tale or example, and I'm not doing that at all. But I do want to say that there is a global danger in what is happening as well. There is a global and human danger in the weaponization of the digital divide. And this is playing out in many brutal wars and has repercussions for many people across the world. This is an example of the AI preparedness prepared by the IMF and highlighting how alarming these divides really are. The digital divide not only damages economic development and health in marginalized regions, it also fosters unhealthy dependencies and asymmetries between the global north and south. Exclusion from advanced technological systems risks deepening the digital divide or even creating forms of technological apartheid, where one group has access to high-speed computing servers and AI, and others are left behind. Addressing the weaponization of the digital divide is thus not merely a matter of inclusion, but a decolonial imperative to reframe AI as a tool that either needs to be abandoned or used as a tool of justice and resilience. without these kinds of efforts, then we really have a tool that is being applied towards differential, racialized, and class-based exposure to suffering and death. So now I'm going to take a very short break. And I want to also shift gears a bit in this section to talk about artists who are, I think, pushing the paradigms of what decolonial AI can be like, and challenging colonial legacies and presence. So artists engage with technology in a much more complex mode of practice, exploring critical, ethical, historical, community-oriented dimensions in a world that is dominated by commercialized innovation. Artist-led innovation from the global south is critical to imagining what decolonial AI might be. So the first example I want to look at is an artist called Min Ateru. This Egon AI engages with the historical trauma of the British colonial invasion of Benin in 1897, which resulted in the mass looting of the Benin bronzes, many of which now are in museums in Europe and in the US and so on in the West. The production of these bronzes was severely disrupted by the colonial violence, and most of these objects are in collections and they haven't been returned. So the artist here is using generative AI, specifically leveraging historical objects. Uses generative AI to create speculative artifacts to imagine what might have the Benin bronzes looked like if it wasn't for the colonial disruption. So she, in her words, is trying to reimagine unknown, absented, forgotten objects in her people's political art historical canon. So she's using StyleGAN to speculate on what local artisans might have created in the 17-year period in terracotta, in bronze, and in other mediums. And she draws from Saidiya Hartman's concept of critical fabulation, which is a method of imagining historical possibilities beyond what is documented. So this speculative process not only fills in historical gaps, it also counters the violent erasures of the colonial archive. The other example that I want to briefly look at is Morishane Aliyari's Moon-Faced project, which addresses the westernization of Persian art during the Qajar dynasty, particularly as it pertains to gender representation in these systems. So the concept of beauty in Persian culture was not really so tied to rigid gender binaries, and the term moon-faced described beauty that transcends gender distinctions. So she uses multimodal AI to recreate some of these portraits and then plays on the ambiguity of the generative AI systems to kind of interrogate our current gender-inflected norms. So the outcomes of her generative AI are kind of more in line with the gender fluidity of the Qajar period. So she is playing with lossy abstraction within generative AI and using it to challenge contemporary norms and narratives that have been lost to the colonial archive. Oops. Okay. So now I will switch gears again to talk a little bit about my work as an artist. So this is a kind of ongoing project, set of methodologies, outputs, which is loosely tied future archives, or unarchiving futures, encountering futureside. So with regards to Palestinian narratives, diasporic experience, and futures, my interest with AI is really using it to counter scholasticide, technocide, the systematic destruction of Palestinian intellectual and technological capabilities, and the violence of the techno-enabled apartheid or the digital divide. And while I acknowledge that the ethical complexities of using AI in this context are real, given as well the systematic erasure of Palestinian narratives now carried into generative AI, I am open to, or I am trying to ethically, in a duplicitous way, try to also see if AI can help with strengthened cultural resistance and resiliences. So the artistic work I am developing centers around unarchiving. It's about undoing the archive of the colonial violence as it plays out in the past, present, and future. It's about expanding the notion of archive to prioritize lived experience, oral histories, sentiments, and ephemeral and artistic knowledge. And since 1948, Palestinians have suffered archival violence in the Nakba denial and the plundering of homes, of cultural artifacts and history, and in the devaluation of lived experience and testimony. So I'm developing some participatory methods for this work. Some of this relates to oral histories and using user annotations on digital documents and crowdsourcing image labeling so as to try to avoid the kind of inherent labor issues with how AI gets labeled and categorized and automated. So the purpose of this unarchive is to actively counter the future side that I have brought up in the beginning. And it's clear that generative AI is part of the potential future side of Palestinian narratives, and so as well as the other marginalized and oppressed groups. And this is my most recent work, which if you want to try, you're welcome to find me afterwards, and you can. So this is a bit of machine learning that is inspired by Palestinian embroidery and ecology and connections to nature and craft and feminist practice, because this embroidery was traditionally created by Palestinian women. In this case, I taught, so basically use machine learning to teach the AI different types of Palestinian patterns, and then add the layer of the plants that are important to Palestinian diet, culture, and history. And I was actually really surprised at how well it did with the project. So this project also uses smaller data sets that have been kind of hand curated by me with a lot of prompts, etc. And it has not gone live yet, but it is up and running. It takes about 30 seconds to generate a new and unique embroidery. And my goal with this is to use it as a fundraising and advocacy tool and to raise funds for Palestinian organizations and causes. Yeah, and this is what the interface is like. So in thinking about how to make sense of AI at this juncture, and whether decolonial AI is actually possible, there is a lot to reflect on in what is currently happening in our world. But it's also, I think, important to try to take apart a kind of very hallowed term in tech development, which is innovation. So I'm kind of going to end, I think, with talking about what is innovation and how, as artists, as media scholars, as humanitarians, can we really think about innovation differently. So I just want to end with looking at a few images. The images on the left reflect a network tree in Gaza, where to optimize signal reception, because there's widespread blackouts and destruction of infrastructures that make internet access almost impossible, phones are being elevated by pulleys to maximize range. These can be suspended from rooftops. They can serve as hotspots for dozens of people. And this was reported by an Italian project called the Gaza Web Project, which is working to provide eSIMs for people in Gaza. And this is the Mu'taz Aziza, who is a photographer, demonstrating how difficult it is to get access. So people are being forced to innovate solutions like this in order to communicate with the world, with one another, and to provide testimonies to the horrors that they're living through. In contrast, on the right, this is an announcement from the last year about the construction of a massive data and computing center in Israel. NVIDIA is building one of the largest supercomputers to support artificial intelligence. So Israel has 9,000 startups. 2,200 of these, according to the AP, are focused on artificial intelligence. So the construction of massive data centers to support AI has significant implications for global power dynamics, for militarization, for digital inequalities. They are inexplicably tied to geopolitical interests. And so as computing power becomes a cornerstone of global tech advancement, it exasperates, it generates, and it weaponizes digital divides. As AI continues to evolve, we should be looking at where these data centers are built, we should be looking at who controls them, and we should be aware of how they're shaping the broader contours of our lives. So, you know, as designers, as humanists, as artists, as practitioners, I think there is a real need to look at what is innovation and who are we innovating for, on what side of the digital divide we are creating you know, ideas, concepts, products. So we are caught in a storm of technologization, militarization, and unfortunately a growing vicious disregard for human life, and indeed maybe all life. And in my view, to avoid being swept into this dehumanization, we need to reoccupy technology, we need to participate in it, we need to get more involved in it, we need to not just be passive consumers in these systems. Someone posted something by James Baldwin that has stuck with me, is we don't really have the luxury to despair about the world. We can be enraged by it, but when doing so, you know, we also find some hope. So at this kind of rough and somewhat incomplete conclusion, the critical issue is really whether AI and other advanced technologies are contributing to our survival as a global collective of human equals, or if, you know, they are in some sense being used to weaponize the digital divide and accelerate our future side, or accelerate future side. So, you know, I think that we need to hope, we need to participate with our love and with our rage, and we need to transform these systems. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ameera, for this passionate and very rich at a visual level presentation. I want to start just by asking you a question, and then I'm hoping that there are questions from the audience. So you touched upon the issue of like AI being an archive, or that AI might be looked at as an archive, which is a quite uncommon perspective on AI, because usually we do see, or we are inclined to see AI as something completely groundbreaking, completely like revolutionary, and we do never see AI in continuation with the past, right? So this idea of like looking at AI as an archive is quite uncommon. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit on this, and also in connection to the local reality of Palestinian archives, because as you said, one of the main issues when it comes to AI is training the data set, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to change the way in which AI gives you pictures back, for example, or text back, so the way in which the biases can be solved in a way, you need to engage with the data set, right?
Yeah.
And training, the process of training the data set. So I wonder how do you work with Palestinian archives, considering also the ongoing destruction of Palestine as a place, you know? So I know that archives are really scattered, and this has been a problem actually for people also who were engaged into filmmaking, for example, that Palestinian archives were very difficult to locate, they were destroyed, they were scattered.
Yeah.
So in the ongoing genocide and futuriside, as you call it, how do you engage with the local realities in Palestine, and how do you transform this into an actual training of an AI, if this makes sense?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think to the first part, you know, what makes AI like an archive is the way that the system is, you know, knowledge is hierarchized, it's labeled, sometimes there's even, which relates to colonial types of archives with the ethnos and with even categorizations that are based on race, et cetera, and we're seeing that with, for example, with biometrics and with face scans, et cetera. So there is a very tangible way that, you know, AI is structured very much like a traditional archive, but its function is not just to retrieve, it's to retrieve and to generate. So I think that, yeah, I think there are some, the artists that I was discussing I think are aware and are using critical archival practice very consciously as a decolonial practice. In terms of data sets, you know, yeah, there is a huge problem with, I mean, on one hand, access, let's say, to Palestinian archives that were, many of which, you know, are in Israeli museums or the Israeli library, et cetera. But I think what I'm trying to do is not necessarily such a conventional archival practice, but really to rethink data ontologies and what the data sets mean. And there are some really interesting projects at the moment related to oral histories in particular and generative AI. So in taking knowledge bases that are not necessarily or not traditionally considered just language-based types of knowing. So how would we work with lived experience? How to work with oral histories? How to open up data ontologies so that they're not so restricted to just very traditional notions of image and et cetera. There are also some interesting projects, for example, in like using AI to upscale archives, old photographs, et cetera. And there are opportunities maybe for new kinds of digital artifacts that are based in, that are interpretive, that are generative, but based in, let's say, a photographic archive. So upscaling those, making them more dynamic, using image to video, for example. So I think, yeah, I mean, in my own work and what I'm getting more interested in is really expanding the notion of what the data set is to include also what is happening now. So oral histories people talking about what they're going through now and turning those into sort of archives as such. So.
Thank you very much, Ameera. And I think we should open the discussion, right? Yes.
Hi, this is good. Could you hear me? My name is Juan. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for this presentation.
You're welcome.
So I guess I have a pretty packed question. So please feel free just to answer however you can. But
Okay.
earlier you said that we must change the way we use AI, or just drop it, or maybe just find something new to use, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if you had any form of framework that you have had in mind to change the way we use AI, because I know most of our education and most of Western education, at least, is really rooted in colonialism.
Yeah.
So how can we change that through a framework or through a start? What would be your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the abolitionist framework, like Ruth Wilson Gilmore and people who were really advocating for abolishing prisons as we know it, and facial recognition technologies, amnesty texts work on that. There's absolutely, I think it is an incredibly important framework, and maybe the one that is most critical. But the way that I think when it comes to specifically also consumer applications, it's really going to be hard to put AI back in the box. And so going for an abolitionist framework, I think it's just not going to, practically, I just don't think it's going to work. But I feel the framework that I'm trying to develop, and maybe there's someone else who's kind of coalesced it or written about it more extensively, but is about how do we increase civilian participatory digital citizenship type ideas. How do we participate in these systems so we have more power in these systems, so that we can transform them, and so that we can demand that they are demilitarized and not used for causing a lot of harm. It's much harder, I think, to do that if you're completely outside of the system, like in my view at this point, but it might change. So
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Working? Okay. Talk a little bit about how you would define the ethical approach to AI going forward. What does that even mean? What is ethical approach on AI?
I mean, there's a lot of initiatives out there for more responsible AI, for more transparent AI, for more understandable AI. People have, there's a number of initiatives to, people don't understand really how AI even works. So, I think there's a lot of existing work on the ethics of AI. My personal approach, which I think is about me as an artist, is this ethical duplicitous approach, where I'm really, really committed to mapping the harms, dangers, and kind of, like almost yelling that out and sounding the alarm. And I've done that in a lot of journalistic work, et cetera. But my approach as an artist is also that I also want to test or make or see what these technologies, I think the classic thing people say about technologies is that they have a dual use problem. They can be used for really a lot of evil, or they can be used for good. Most of the time, they're not used for good. So we have to really build the use cases for the positive uses of these technologies and throw them out and hope that they propagate. So that's my kind of like more practical view of as a practitioner, as an artist, of how I'm engaging with these systems.
I'm going to take the chance to ask another question
Okay.
since no one else now is still up to. I want to go back to the question of generative AI and violence, which is also a question that really interests me in my own research. And I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on the project that you have on the synthetic violence, which is extremely important because I think so far on, mainstream media and common parlance, we have focused so much on deception when it comes to AI or military uses of AI, such as the case of Lavender in Gaza. However, I do think that the kind of speculative, for lack of a better word, but speculative use of AI, like imagining how Gaza looks like in 2013, it's a way to actually trigger violence. And I saw very recently, I think a couple of days ago, another Gen AI video, which was about Al-Aqsa Mosque burning. I don't know if you have seen this one, if anyone else has seen this video, but of course, Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is a holy place for Muslims. So the fact that you see it burning, it's a way to trigger violence, basically. So even if it's not happening, empirically speaking, in reality, however, there's something speculative that kind of triggers the violence anyways. So I think this is an extremely important and very dangerous use of AI in the direction of speculation, which might end up triggering violence. So would you like to elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely, and I think that this speculative aspect, but it's also this. I think you also worked on this as like a synthetic realism. So what does it mean to lend an idea, outlandish as it is, all of a sudden it has a very, very hyper real form. And I think the rapidity of which this media can be generated literally in a few minutes, and that the quickness of that response in relation to the event or the thing that people are getting, has really a lot of potential to magnify this inflammatory aspect. I think unlike maybe any other, I don't know, I don't want to make a huge claim, but you would have had to have taken weeks to produce a video like that and the right visual effects, etc. So now that the fact this is happening, in a couple of minutes, I think is really is fuel to the fire, etc. So yeah, I don't know if I answered all aspects.
I think, of course, it's very difficult to answer because this is something brand new in the making. I was just wondering, as a follow-up question, I was just wondering if, because you're, the other artist working with you is Turkish, right? So I wonder if you have seen also Gen AI being used by the Prime Minister in Turkey, because I also very recently saw a song that was Gen AI, and also a video that speculates on a future in which, I think in 2040 something, in which you have children in different parts of the world, in Seoul, in Germany, asking their parents, what were you doing when the genocide was happening? So this video is actually imagining a future in which the genocide has been acknowledged by everyone, so it's a kind of Holocaust museum situation, in which children are asking their parents, what have you done? Were you just standing and watching silently? And so the video is actually a way that Turkey is using to kind of suggest that we should do more. And at the end of the video, there is a caption saying, do the arms embargo, or something like that. So something, it's like calling to action. And this is made by Erdogan, right? So I wonder, have you seen this video?
I've seen the video, but I didn't realize that it was made by the Turkish government. Yeah, I have seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen this video, by the way? No? I don't see, have you seen it? Okay. I don't know if you want to add a bit, because for me it was, since I am following all these videos made by Gen AI that are more directly kind of imagining post-Gaza, but they are mostly made by Israelis, So the fact that there is another player, which is Turkey, imagining how the world, not only Gaza, but the world might look like after the genocide was interesting. And of course, because it's made by an official, actually, the most important person in Turkey, it means that Turkey is also trying to play a role, you know. So I don't know if you want to add anything to, no? But it was interesting. So I think there are like different ways of using Gen AI to, well, in a speculative direction, which are either, you know, triggering violence or kind of suggesting that a violent action might be initiated because you see, for example, Al-Aqsa Mosque burning. But there are also other videos, such as the one I just mentioned, in which you kind of try to mobilize the world to do something, you know, in order to avoid a possible future, if you see what I mean. So for me, it was very interesting, but it's brand new, so I haven't seen anything.
And there's so many challenges to just actually maintaining the archive, because there's so proliferation of synthetic media everywhere that, you know, I think actually strategies for how we can bring in more people from different parts of the world, et cetera, to make it more, you know, people can add their own, add to the archive, I think is really important, because it's almost impossible for a couple of archivists to just capture the scale of what's going on. Of course, you can use digital tools as well for some of that archiving, such as you know, data scraping, and you can even probably do some machine learning to start to recognize actually what these harms are. You know, so these are other possible like evolutions of the project.
Yes, and I think another important issue at stake or topic that should be explored is how these videos circulate. Because a couple of days ago, a friend of mine is completely unrelated to this, said, have you seen the video about the genocide at the Museum of the Holocaust in Gaza? And she was referring to the Turkish video. And I said, did you realize that this is made by Turkey? And she said, no, because actually completely different crowd was sharing it, you know. Right. So it's also very interesting to track the
dissemination,
circulation.
Absolutely.
And the reasons that it would be very interesting actually to look at the different reasons why people are sharing these videos, with what kind of expectations, what kind of rational, different crowds. Because of course I do see why Turkey is doing this, right?
Sure.
Especially Erdogan. But it's more of a mystery why other people that are completely unrelated to are using it to kind of say, oh, this might happen if we don't do anything.
Yeah. I mean, I know there were, you know, there were a few media watchdog type groups that were tracking hashtags in relation to like the riots in the UK and how the network traffic works and who was sharing, and how that directly corresponded with particularly Elon Musk's retweeting of certain hashtags, directly correlated with a spike in violence in the UK, et cetera. But I don't know anyone doing it with generative AI. I think it's definitely possible, though, to kind of track these some of this media.
Thank you.
So I've seen a lot on like search engines and other personal social media feeds and news feeds. Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Yeah. On a lot of like search engines and personalized social media and news feeds, there's a lot about like our filters kind of making an existing bias in the things that, in the results that come up. And I was wondering if you've seen that with AI, and if you have, like what are some ways that you can kind of work around those technological biases that develop based on the information that it's been receiving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so filters, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can speak a bit about, for example, some of my work or projects that, I mean, you can, you know, every model has some degree of bias, right? And some are, yeah, and some might be biased in, I've noticed that, I mean, I didn't show the full range, like, for example, with Palestinian bias, et cetera. It seems like GPT and is gone more into like this la-la land. Like they've recognized there's a problem with anti-Palestinian representation, and then they've gone into this kind of very romantic historical depictions, et cetera. I think if you really want to, if you're reckoning with the biases, it's very difficult if you're using just consumer-based technology. Like I had another project which is not here, which was a Ghanaian American performance artist, and we wanted to create generative AI avatars of her performance, and the default, the model kept defaulting to like a white body and features because that's the primary, and it was very, very frustrating. Almost impossible to continue working with that particular platform. I think if you want to kind of go beyond that, you have to start going a little bit deeper, and you have to, you know, start looking at customized AI models, you know, diffusion models, where you can you start with the base model, then you do some additional training. That's kind of what I did with this embroidery project. But I think almost if you're using anything out of the box, like you should be concerned, and there, you know, there'll be a lot to counter, and that will be affecting the outcomes. And to go beyond that, I think, you know, look at customizing open source AI models like diffusion models and such. So I hope that answered sort of your,
yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Kind of as a follow-up on that last point, a large part of what you were talking about here is about making these technologies more participatory, more democratic in that sense. And could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the strategies you're thinking about for making that next step beyond the commercial out-of-the-box interfaces accessible to communities of people who are maybe just starting out, and how artists who are doing this kind of work, maybe one of their offices that they can fulfill is vernacularizing this kind of technology and help distributing it. Thinking about a couple of organizations in Barcelona, I can tell you about that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the vernacularizing part is really, really interesting, particularly with regards to like Arabic, for example. And that's not, I'm not an LLM person, it's not my specialty, et cetera, but I have met people who are really working on making AI better understand different dialects, you know, Shami dialects that it currently doesn't understand. So that's a kind of area that has to be flagged, and it's an epistemicide, et cetera. You know, in my own work and with the people that I'm working with, and I can't say a huge amount about this project yet because it's still kind of in its early stages, but is an oral histories related project that will be also looking at how oral histories can be democratized, disseminated, and more participatory, like so that, for example, you know, users can annotate the archive, they can leave notes. It's not like you're just, they're part of the archival kind of construction in the stories that you give. So it's your stories, it's the people that you know, and then there's, you know, a possibility for that to continue to grow through participatory archival methods. So I don't think, you know, it's the kind of work that is very emergent. There are some really interesting projects around that, particularly oral histories related. And then in, you know, the potential of then using that, leveraging that, let's say with Gen AI visuals or upscaling archival images, et cetera. I think these are all kind of like very new and emergent ideas that are going to take a lot of different kind of minds and skills, and you know, from the digital humanities to the open source kind of methodologies, et cetera. But yeah.
Sorry, I just have so many questions. So like, in the process of like decolonizing AI, is it possible to, for colonial and decolonial scholastics to coexist in the same space? Or do we need to, I guess, get rid of the colonial epistemologies to truly, I guess, to prevent this, I believe the word you used was epistemicide. Sorry,
Yeah.
I couldn't say it, but
I think you just came up with your PhD thesis. It's a really, really good question. I have to actually think about that. I think that, yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, you kind of archive, you unarchive at the same time. We rethink the archives. You know, it's not about, I think, destroying any kind of knowledge, right? So making more sort of like a multiverse or ecologies of knowing. I don't think I'm for the destruction of any particular tradition, but there are, you know, techniques of unarchiving and re-archiving, et cetera. And I think you should pursue the question.
Thank you. I mean, I study grief communication in the in decolonizing grief itself. So
that's
like,
really interesting.
Yeah, I'm like really interested in this topic because how do we keep the grief that we have while still building on it? So
Yeah.
this whole conversation and this whole like presentation has been really insightful. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's really interesting. I have a very good friend who's Greek, and we've had some conversations about this because she feels that like the whole tradition has been interpreted in such a colonial way that it's hard to kind of, yeah. So, yeah.
Anyone else? Maybe I'll take the chance.
Okay.
My last question.
Okay.
Though. I just would like to ask you when it comes to activism, you know, because I believe that we all have seen All Eyes on Rafah a while ago. I think it was shared in May 24. And this is widely, it's a Gen AI image made by AI. And it was shared by, I believe, 50 million people globally, you know, so it's a huge number. So I would like your take on this. Why all these people share these images, and does this kind of Gen AI image making contribute to activism or undermines?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much controversy about that image, and then there was controversy about the controversy because people were upset that why are we talking about generative AI when at that time I think it was the 10th massacre. Like, so, you know, there were a lot of activists who were frustrated because that's where the discussion went, which, you know, I understand. At the same time, there were some really, and I did some interviews, et cetera, at that time, just looking at why did this image go viral? Where, you know, there's like snow-capped mountains in the background. It doesn't look anything like Gaza. It has nothing to do with Palestinian lived experience. There was a perception that somehow it was safer, that it was sanitized. Not sure. There was also the argument that because the text is embedded into an image, like kind of visual, it didn't get flagged by the censors, so it was shared very, very quickly, and that's how you kind of build virality. You need stuff. So it could have been just a kind of weird hack that it went viral because the All Eyes on Rafah might not have gone viral, might have been flagged by Meta or whatever. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. At the same time, people were activists were frustrated that that discussion was happening at that particular moment. So I understand that as well. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything. Oh, yeah? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you again for this talk. So many questions, but if I get the chance of maybe asking one of the last questions, if you could talk a bit more about your artistic practice in terms of decolonializing narratives, the tapestry that you have created. Just more details about the locations, the input, because I would say that, as you said, art is a form of resistance and resilience.
Yeah.
And yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So just to sort of give us more details about the artistic process of arriving to these
Yeah.
these images?
So this was quite experimental. I didn't really know how it would, how it would work, and I was surprised that it worked as well as it worked. So this was, this is the interface. So basically, a customized diffusion model that was trained on different styles of Palestinian embroidery, because the styles were very much connected to specific villages and specific places, and they tend to feature plants from the local ecology. So I took inspiration from that. They don't look like this exactly, but had a data sets related to the different plants, which then I put into a, I generated new images of them so that they had the same kind of look. And then that mixed with the different kind of archives of the Palestinian embroidery that I had sourced mostly from images and such online, and then kind of combined them, did a bunch of prompting. So what it does now is that, I mean, I'm happy if you want to talk to me after, you can actually try it, but you choose a style, and there's currently 4 styles. You choose a plant, and then it will generate in about 30, 40 seconds a unique take on, inspired by, I would say, Palestinian embroidery and ecology, et cetera. I don't really know what I'm going to do with this exactly. I know that people have tried it, they've really enjoyed it. I would like to use it for fundraising and advocacy, so that you generate some images, and then you need to donate to important causes, etc. But there were some people who used this and they said, wow, it's so hard to find good patterns to do, people who do this type of tatriz, embroidery. It would be, I would love if somehow this went back to actually kind of strengthening the craft itself. So whether that is through the resource, through potential funds that this can raise, or if there's a way to bring this back into the craft element so people can do their own embroidery. It's to generate their own patterns, do their own embroidery. It's not at all meant to compete or replace, et cetera, the actual handicraft, et cetera, and practice. So it's still a work in progress. It's only like a month or two complete. But I'm hoping to continue to develop it.
As participatory practice.
Participatory, yeah, and directly, tied to, I think fundraising is a big part of activism as well, and one that doesn't get as much focus sometimes. So.
And if I may, I find it very interesting that we're talking about multidisciplinary arts and how you found the embodiment as a patriarchal narrative of the white figure. Because I thought this is amazing as an archive of sound, of vernacular, of auditory elements, movement as well, but as the other attendee was saying, it's art and culture is so colonized. So
yeah,
very, very interesting food for thought. Any thought, have you been collaborating or have you heard of any other artists that are doing maybe, or want to collaborate in terms of archival inputs of other artistic disciplines beyond the visual, let's say?
Yeah, I would love to work with the sound, and I'm talking to artists who work with archives. Someone who has a really amazing project right now, which I'm not able to discuss too much about, but it's really important and timely. For me personally, it seems like I have this project, and then 2 years ago, whatever, I had the digital kafia project, which was about translating the kafia into digital spaces. At the time that was more metaverse oriented. So, but I was about how, and then I wrote an article about generative AI and the kafia and how that was revealing biases, et cetera. So it seems like I have a certain interest in translating material textiles into digital form. It just seems something, and finding self-representation in that, I think, is what's really, really important. That people from within those very same cultures, et cetera, are exploring and are playing with these technologies, and not anyone else. So, yeah, but I mean, I think there's amazing, I'm sure, I don't know that much about sound, but very, very, be very happy to discuss sound projects with generative AI artists, if that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think this was our ending note.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Ameera
Donatella.
Kawash.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.